Hey, it's Pete back with my Week 2 Rocket Summer 2025 wrap-up. And hopefully it'll be a short one, one would hope. I don't unhope it because I've only got one book. So Rocket Summer 25 is Michael K. Vaughan's event where we read books, science fiction books from the 30s or before, the 40s, the 50s, and then the fourth week, the 60s. And then there'll be a few days left over to read books from the real decade of science fiction from the 1970s. In addition to Michael's big brother-ish edicts of what decade to read from, I'm just kidding. You know, he really doesn't care. He just set up the guidelines for fun, and this is his event. He can do what he wants, is to read from those decades. But I added on my own structure that I'm only going to read this year. I'm only going to read books from outside, from non-Americans, mostly British, but from people outside as much as I can find outside of the John Campbell, Hugo Gernsback pulp tradition. So last week I read The Time Machine, and trying not to cough and hack in the middle of my video. I read The Time Machine, I read War of the Worlds. I managed to squeeze in the first Professor Challenger book, The Lost World by Conan Doyle, this week as well, but I don't have much to say about that. I might do a part 2 if I end up reading more SF, but the one book I read for Week 2 Challenge from the 1940s is 1984. I didn't go searching very hard to figure out what to read. The 40s isn't my favorite decade, but you know, we've always been at war with Eurasia, so I thought, why not read 1984? It is definitely a science fiction novel. It is definitely a book by a British writer. He was a socialist. This is his last book he managed to write before he passed away fairly young. Immediately before this, he'd written Animal Farm. And before that, he'd written another excellent novel, which I highly recommend, called Coming Up for Air, which is about England on the eve of war. It's a brilliant book. It's very beautifully written. Actually, I read a lot. I read pretty much everything by Orwell that I could find early in my life. I really liked his writing. The other ones I'd recommend, especially, that are just good reads, no matter if you care about his point of view or not. There's a fun book called Keep the Aspidistra Flying, which is about a failed poet. All of his novels are good. His books of essays and his book-length essays are also particularly brilliant. I'm going to single out Down and Out in Paris and London. That's a fantastic book. I've never given that book to anybody that they didn't love it. It's slightly fictionalized memoir. First half, he's working as a waiter in a very busy, cosmopolitan, hectic French restaurant in Paris. I think it's in Paris. Then on second half, on his return to England, he's homeless for a while. He's a tramp. He's on the road. When I say lightly fictionalized, he actually went on the road and chose to live this way, sleep rough, as they say in England, I believe. You know, as kind of journalistic research. So he really had means that he didn't have to do that. But anyway, it's a fantastic book. His other great nonfiction memoirs, Homage to Catalonia, which is about his experience in the Spanish Civil War, fighting against the fascists on the side of the anarchists and the socialists. It's a great indictment of the foolishness of war, and it's really a classic a classic exercise in de-romanticizing war. And you could say the same thing about Animal Farm, which is a critique of Stalinism, and 1984, which is a critique of totalitarianism and Stalinism too. Really, George Orwell being very, I would say, honest and very willing to critique his own side in the ideological divide that we're still in to some degree, or to a different degree. So First thing I noticed about this book, I had read this book when I was, I don't know, 20 or so, when I read all this other stuff. I should say also, I was inspired to pick this book and also The Time Machine from the wonderful channel Outlaw Bookseller, who had both those books on his all-time favorite science fiction books. And in that I learned this is the proper way to show the title. It's not 1984, it's all spelled out 1984. So I wasn't able to get a copy that is correctly done that way on my ebook, so I use this cover instead. There's a couple other covers that do this. This is wrong. This is correct. And you go through most of these, and here's a really beautiful cover too. This one's really cool. You've got Big Brother there without his mustache for some reason. Here he is with his mustache, but with the wrong rendering of the title. I think most people know the book, even if they haven't read the book. And I just want to talk about, I guess I'll just talk about a couple things I noticed that I noticed more. And this is kind of a theme lately since I've been rereading. I almost never reread stuff, but I've been doing, this might be the first cover. I almost never reread in my life. I've hardly ever reread stuff except for P.G. Wodehouse or stuff that's really, really entertaining. But I've done a lot of rereading the last couple of years, especially of books that I read when I was very young. And I'm always finding, probably unsurprisingly, a lot more stuff in them than I thought was originally there. Or stuff I didn't notice because I'm at a different point in my life. So I'm becoming more of a fan of rereading. There's two camps, I believe, on that. People really believe you haven't read a book unless you've read it more than once. But one thing for me is I have such a good memory. Once I read a book, many times I'll reread a book and I'll realize I remember it completely. But there were things in here I didn't notice or were just outside of my worldview at that time when I read it. You know, didn't know much about the United Kingdom. Didn't know much about the class system. One thing that really struck me, other than, of course, Orwell is just a fantastic writer, a fantastically gifted writer who was able to write, I don't know if propaganda is the right word, or he was able to write polemical books, books that had a point, books that had a political point to make, and yet still tell a fantastic story. Just page by page, to write characters you care about, to write, to very deftly do that difficult thing that science fiction writers are struggling with, of very deftly and naturally bringing you into the world of the fictional world of the characters in a way that you can understand it, but also feels natural, that the people aren't just standing around talking about stuff they would already take for granted. And the people, Winston Smith particularly, but everybody pretty much in Winston Smith's milieu, he's lived pretty, horrifically desperate lives because they are part of a totalitarian system. And what I found most interesting about this book was they're all involved in it. Winston Smith is not just a baker or a waiter or something, or a workman or coal miner or something who's oppressed by the state. He is actually part of the apparatus. So he reminds me very much of the character, if you've ever seen the German movie, which I highly recommend, called The Lives of Others, which was filmed after the fall of the Berlin Wall, about the Stasi. It's in East Berlin. Fantastic movie. I think anybody interested in reading in 1984 would love that film as well. Losing my train of thought here. Okay, so and there's the people he works with, and his later becomes romantically involved with. They're all, not only are they victims of the state, they're also part of the state. And what you get is the sense that they all know it's bullshit. They all know they're being oppressed. There's an old saying or something I read once ago. I can't really reference it. It's just been in my head for years. I believe it's about Pravda in the big newspaper in the Soviet Union, where the paper would print lies. So the government would print lies. The people would read the lies knowing that they're lies. The government who had printed the lies know that the people who are reading lies know that they're lies. And the people also know that the government knows that they're lying. And this relates to another big part of the book that I didn't notice at all before the first time I read it, which I'm more aware of now. And this also relates 1984 to The Time Machine, which of course, certainly George Orwell would have been well aware of H.G. Wells' work as a science fiction writer and as a socialist as well, an early British socialist. In that there is 1984 could almost be a stop on the time traveler's journey to his ultimate destination, 800,000 years in the future. In that, by that I mean the class system in Britain is already separating into two separate species. I don't know if this is just coincidence, or maybe Orwell was influenced by Wells's thinking on this, but in the book, 1984, you've got three classes. You've got a class that's barely alerted to, called the capitalists, which are kind of just really a false caste that are there as sort of a scapegoat for people to be jealous of and to hate. And that's obviously not a parallel today, because we do have real billionaires. I'm gonna have to drink of water. And then you've got Winston Smith and Julia and other people in their class who are, I guess you would call the intelligentsia, although the structure of the society has a very anti-intellectual ethos. But they're the educated people. They're the people who keep things running. They're the people who keep the censorship running. They're the people that have to report on each other. They're the people. Winston Smith's job is to rewrite news reports, taking out stuff out of the news archives that is no longer permissible to read about, and then he writes a fake version of the news, and then different people in his department will write other fake versions, and they'll kind of compare them, and someone will decide which is the best fake version. So they're all complicit in it, and there's a strong implication, though he never says this early on, that they know it's all bullshit. They know they're lying. They know they're paid to lie. They know that if they don't lie, they might be denounced by anyone because of the thought police, or the society that encourages them to rat each other out. So they can never trust anybody. It's a low trust society, intentionally designed to be a low trust society. But there's this other group of people called the proles, the proletariat, which are the working people and the uneducated people. They're probably illiterate at this point, who do menial jobs, or who are who might be prostitutes, or homeless people, or anybody. This class of people that are really compared in the nomenclature of Big Brother to animals. Like animals and proletarians are free. They're so low on the totem pole, they're not even worth propagandizing. For example, Julia, the character he meets and falls in love with, she works for another ministry. I didn't make notes of anything of the names of these things. People probably know. She works for a ministry that, and this is very prescient, probably more prescient now than even a few years ago. She works for a ministry that writes, that produces machine-written novels. And then the machines write the novels, in newspeak, the dumbed down language that they're creating, with all the right ideas, and then people go through them and kind of clean them up and make them a little more readable. But before that, she had worked in another section of that ministry where they produce pornography for the just pornographic novels for for the proletarians. So I guess they're not illiterate because they're able to read those novels. And the trick there is that the people, the government pumps these out sort of to deaden people, along with like gin and cigarettes, tobacco, and, regular vices. The proletarians are not allowed to drink gin, but they still drink gin. The middle class, the people that the book is about, do have access to gin, which is very, very cheap. It's like 10 cents a shot or something. Because they want people drunk on their time off. They want people to use their 2 minutes of abuse to yell at Big Brother during the day. And they have all these, escapes like that. And, so the proletarians are reading these porn books, and they presented them into a way that they think they're illegal. They think they're getting something illegal, or dangerous or subversive, when it's all actually really published by their own government. So that whole thing in the book that I found very interesting of this world being mostly afraid of itself. So these people in the middle class, or the educated classes, are the people who Big Brother has to guard the hardest, because they are the people that the totalitarian state needs to run itself. But they're also the people that, because they have the skills to censor things and to make judgments and to read and form their own thoughts, they have to be able to form their own thoughts so that they can find out what thoughts should be forbidden. They are also the people that are most dangerous to the state. So they have to be the most repressed, because they are the people in a position to destroy it if they could. And yeah, that's really all I wanted to say about those observations that are what make the book, I think, universal, that go beyond going beyond just being a Cold War satire, because these impulses by government, this sort of power, this sort of critique of power that George Orwell does in this book and in Animal Farm, much like the Who song "Don't Get Fooled Again," where there's a corrupt system that's overthrown, and then the new people in power become as bad or as worse than the others. It's a parody of it in Bananas by the early Woody Allen movie too, where these revolutionaries come in and take over the government and become the same as the other people, much like we've seen in history, we see all the time, no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on. We're going through a bit of it now with the current administration, where certain people spent the last 4 years just ginning up this furor about the Epstein files. And you've got three people particularly, besides Trump himself. You got Bondi, Bongino, Kash Patel, who spent, the entire Biden administration telling you they're going to get in there and they're going to get the Epstein files. When they get into power, something changed immediately. They either found out there was nothing to talk about, in which case they should probably apologize for whipping up the base in a frenzy about all this stuff. But that's not what they're doing, and they're either covering it up or there's really nothing. There was nothing to it in the beginning. I mean, I have my opinions. I'm sure you have your opinions if you've been following the Epstein trial. But what they're doing is they're just saying, like, why are you even talking about this stuff? They're banking on our collective amnesia. And it reminds me of a very famous section in the book where it starts out, the country that we're in, Ingsoc, I forget the name of the country. The other countries are easy to remember, but there's 3 blocks in the world. There's Great Britain and the United States are one block. which is where the book sets place. And then there's Eurasia, which is another block, which is comparable to the Soviet Union and all of the rest of Europe, which is occupied by the Soviet Union, beyond the part that was occupied during the Cold War. And then a third block called East Asia, which would be China. And then Africa and the Middle East are chaotic civil war states who really aren't governed by anybody. So it's pretty analogous to the actual world, the tripolar world that we lived in, especially during the Cold War, but also that we're now back to. And there's a point being made in this novel. They're essentially all the same country. They essentially all have the same totalitarian system at this point. Once Winston Smith, in the last third of the novel, which is the most chilling part of the novel, where he is is arrested and tortured and interrogated by this person named O'Brien, who has a lot of information for Winston Smith about the nature of the world they live in. Winston Smith asks him if Big Brother is real, and O'Brien gives him a sort of a Jordan Peterson answer, like, well, what does real mean? What do you mean real? Why would it matter if he's real or not? So all that stuff's very interesting, very thought-provoking. I wish I'd made some notes. I always say that, but I never do, so I don't know why I say it. Anyway, and in the end, it's a very dark ending, unless you're a very cynical person. Unless you're Joey Pants from, I forget his character's name in the first Matrix movie, then it's a pretty happy solution. What I think that the movie, the book, still appeals to people for is because it's about a very ugly aspect of human nature, especially when people get into power. Is that it's the old cliche, it's corrupting, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. But the terror comes in is when it became when the world became industrialized, which gave the totalitarian impulse so many more tools. You were limited by time and space before if you were going to oppress people, if you're going to be an oppressive parent or an oppressive leader of a small band of a small army or something like that. But from the time of the 40s, beginning of the 20th century, started getting all the tools that make it possible to, at least in theory, completely control an entire populace with audio and video and microphones and surveillance. You can surveil everybody, even if you don't have the people to watch everybody. So in 1984, in the book, they have a society that's completely created of all the people who could destroy the society are all tasked with spying on each other, which is possible because they have TVs, and you can watch people on the TV. You don't have to have everybody watching you all the time. You just have to know that the state has the ability to watch you at all times. And that's where the book ends up. It's very dark. We're not there yet. We're never there completely because even we have so much more surveillance now, and every crisis brings in new powers, take away a little more of our freedom in exchange for safety. Starting with the Patriot Act in 2001, after 9/11. One side might bring it in, but both sides are going to use it. It goes on further up to right now. We're at artificial intelligence and Palantir, and these are being sold to us as tools to keep us safe from these faceless enemies, these horrible people across the world who are building bombs and that somehow are going to be able to attack us, and it's the state using our fear to control us. It works a lot of the time, but then there's always pushback. There's always a backlash. So we're not in the world of 1984. We're closer than ever. We're probably going to keep going that way, but there's also, against the impulse that people have to control, to grab onto power for power's sake, and to do whatever they can to hold it, and to eliminate the powers of common people to defeat it. There's still the contrary human impulse to be free, to be your own person, to have your own be in charge of yourself, to have your own integrity, to have your own dignity, and that's always counterbalancing the forces of the totalitarianism, I believe. And so ultimately, I think 1984 is a very dark book. It paints the darkest possible outcome, but compare that to the real world, where people still have their humanity to preserve, and their will to be themselves, which is always a counterbalance to Big Brother.